to all of you in attendance or possibly listening to this as a recording perhaps at a later time. Always a pleasure to partner with DSD. Been familiar with them for many years, probably 25 or 30 years that I've had affiliation and relationship with the leadership and the team over at DSD. Really high quality partner that I have always admired. So it's always a pleasure to be part of the presentations for them and to their customers. So thanks for the opportunity to do that. So as Kimberly mentioned, yes, I am with NETSTOCK, and NETSTOCK is the publisher and support organization behind the Sage Inventory Advisor application. Prior to NETSTOCK, I was with Avalara for a few years. You've probably heard of them. But prior to that, for almost 25 years of my career, I was a Sage reseller, a business partner, much like DSD, primarily in the Phoenix area, but also did some business in Texas and Las Vegas and so forth, so Southwest. And so very familiar with the process of implementing ERPs and looking at how to get the most out of those ERP applications, whether it's by customizing and enhancing the actual database and the functionality of the tool, like DSD offers in many cases some great enhancements to the Sage product, or whether it's adding third-party products like Avalara or Sage Inventory Advisor and others that might apply. So a lot of familiarity with that process, and hopefully that helps to inform a little bit of what I bring to you today in terms of the Inventory Advisor application. So the topic is turbulent times, right? And that certainly is the state of supply chains in 2021, which is really kind of overtime of 2020, right? We're like in the 14th month of 2020, it feels like in some respects. And it's constant. We're seeing supply chain disruptions all over the place. We experienced it certainly as consumers early on in the pandemic with paper goods and medical supplies and so forth. We certainly see it in the news almost every day. Now the topic of conversation in terms of supply chain primarily is around vaccine delivery and what we're seeing as cold chains for these vaccines that need to be stored at very cold temperatures. So that's, again, in the news every single day. And we also know that the pandemic is increasing and receding in different areas of the country and in different geographies around the world. And of course, many of our supply chains today rely on non-domestic production and long lead times from all kinds of regions, Asia, Europe, South America, and so forth. So as those things pop up, it's kind of like a whack-a-mole situation, right? We might think we're finally, over the worst of it, and then something else pops up, these new variants with surges and so forth. So it's an ongoing challenge, and we're learning more how to deal with the pandemic itself, right? We're learning things from health authorities and so forth. We're monitoring things better, doing better testing, so forth. But the supply chain shocks are still rippling through every single day. We see articles all the time. We just clipped one out here the other day from Reuters regarding car manufacturers that are literally having to cut vehicle production for the lack of semiconductors. Of course, we know that chips are a big part of car construction these days, with all the sensors and so forth that are built into vehicles, and probably the least expensive component in the entire production, and it's holding up entire production lines. We actually recently did a webinar with one of our customers, a company called Traeger Grills that you're probably familiar with, the Traeger smokers, and of course they control temperature within those grills using semiconductor chips as well, and they've had the same issue, right? Again, probably the least expensive component in that entire grill, some of which sell for $1,500, $2,000. They got some really high quality, high end, really cool products, and they're being hamstrung by something as simple as a microchip. And we see these examples all the time in the news. You can't read an article or get on the TV without seeing some impact of this. And so clearly, COVID-19 is a unique, dramatic impact, but it's also important to have some context here that supply chains always have dealt with disruptions, right? That's a typical, normal, quote unquote, example in existence for supply chains. Before COVID hit us, we were already dealing with trade wars and tariffs and the impacts of that. We were already dealing with increasing transportation costs and challenges within the ports. So anybody that's been importing product, bringing in product from overseas, has already dealt with some of those things. And of course, there's other unplanned things like natural disasters. Anybody that was bringing product in through New Orleans or Houston and the Gulf Coast this summer, they got hit with 4 consecutive hurricanes, right? And it shut down ports in different parts of that region on and off throughout the summer and into late summer. We see labor strikes and political unrest. So there's all kinds of things that cause disruptions. I saw a report the other day that off of Long Beach, and maybe some of you are up in that part of Southern California, there's something like 60 or 70 freighters sitting out in the water waiting to get a spot in Long Beach in LA Harbor to unload their product. And they've been sitting there for weeks. And it's partly because of COVID, because of a lack of skilled labor being able to manage the cranes and unload the ships that are there, and other folks that are involved in the unloading. There's because of folks being out with illness or quarantining and so forth. So, things that you wouldn't even think of that are having an impact on our supply chains. There's the product sitting right offshore and I can't get it. How frustrating is that? And so things like labor strikes and political unrest and so forth. And then of course, there's scheduled events like Chinese New Year, which we're in the midst of right now, right? That just kicked off. Happy New Year to those of you that celebrate that. And so if I was buying product a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, and I knew that delivery was going to be impacted by Chinese New Year, I'd need to get ahead of that, right? Make some changes in the way that I approach my buying so that I can accommodate that. Sometimes we experience that with products coming out of Europe in the month of August. Everybody goes on holiday, right? So even in normal standard operating procedure times for supply chain folks, we know that disruption is common, right? It's the nature of the beast. And so it's always been true that we needed a best practices approach to solving those problems, to dealing with those disruptions. Now, again, clearly what COVID-19 has done to us is an extreme example, but I think it's important to have some context there. So, and we like to think of it, I think, in terms of different time frames, right? If we think short term, in this case, we went through the initial shock last March, April, maybe into May, where we said, holy cow, I didn't see this coming. What in the world's going on? We may have seen impacts on our supply side where I couldn't get product out of China by then because they were already shutting down in January and February, and now I'm running out of product and I can't get it in. May have been on the demand side, where maybe if I was in the business of selling product to restaurants or hotels and those places were shutting down, all of a sudden I'm overstocked. I've got no demand for those products. Or maybe in the reverse. Maybe I was on the side where I was selling PPE and other medical devices and so forth that had huge demand. All of a sudden the surges were extreme. Some of those paper goods that I referenced. So there could have been, and you may be in the same organization where I've got different product lines in different markets, where I've got some that are going through the roof and some that are falling through the floor in terms of demand. So we had that initial short-term shock that we had to understand what was going on. How do I manage what's happening, getting on the phone, talking with my customers and my suppliers, understanding what the risks were and what my options were and so forth. So you were kind of all hands on deck, right, and figure it out. Then you sort of get into a medium term where you've made some adjustments. You've got my arms around what's going on, so that we can make some plans and have a reasonable expectation, and we start managing things a little bit better. We think about tweaking some replenishment cycles, buying more frequently but in smaller amounts so that I can manage the flow better. Maybe I start looking at and I've already now identified some alternative suppliers that can get me some product that I need, and I've worked through those communications. And then and so we're sort of in still that medium term, but even now as we approach the long term, right, I'm starting to make purchase requirements and decisions for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on my lead times. If I'm looking at historical information from March, April, May of last year, that data is no longer of any use to me, right? How do I use that as a reference point for knowing what to expect for my demand this year? So now I've got to be thinking longer term. What do I do with those wacky results that I had in the first part and middle part of last year, and how does that drive my decision making now? So I've got to really analyze those forecasts, look at those histories, and think about maybe a better representation of what the next 3 months will look like was maybe what last fall looked like. Maybe September, October, November are the better dates for me to look at for what my demand was then, and use that as my model for this spring, for example, right? So we've got lots of different things that we need to look at from a long-term perspective, including Was I already considering and looking at doing some more nearshoring? Was I thinking about bringing some of that production back from Asia and maybe into the same hemisphere, right, into Mexico or South America, or whatever the case might be, or back domestically within the States? Could I find some alternative suppliers? That was already a trend that was occurring because of those rising transportation costs that I mentioned. In some products, the gap between costs overseas and domestically was starting to narrow. And politically, there's obviously lots of motivation and movement towards building in America and bringing back manufacturing into the States. So there's multiple other influences going on there that now maybe this accelerated some of that decision making and some of those trends and some of that long-term planning, because that's not a switch you flip overnight, but it's something that I take a look at and say, okay, what does the next few years look like, and how do I adjust my supply chains accordingly, right? And so it really gives us an opportunity to ask some questions for us, right? How are we doing? How did we do, first of all, right? How did we react to what was going on? Were our systems up to the task, right? Did we have good data, good information, good processes, and were our people trained and up to speed and up to the task of really managing these disruptions, and use this as a model for how do I deal with the everyday run-of-the-mill sort of disruptions that we've already talked about, right? What I learned from this, how does that help me address what my replenishment process needs to look like? Again, what's happening with those transportation networks and so forth, and how did my ERP perform, right? If I'm running Sage 100, did I leverage all the data there? Do I have other tools that I've aligned with the Sage application to get me the data that I need? So it's an opportunity for us to really get better at this. Some of you may have attended some of the sessions that Sage hosted earlier this summer when everything went virtual. There were some customer events and conferences, and Nancy Harris, the kind of the general manager of the U.S. operation, gave a little keynote, and she talked about, instead of using the phrase new normal, which is actually one that I'm starting to get tired of, she talked about, let's make this a better normal, right? As we come back from this and learn from this, we can do things better. And I think that's a great perspective. And I think it's really true that if we don't come out of this crisis and all this pain, having learned something and improved our business processes as a result, then we've really missed an opportunity. So I think that's a good way to think about what we've been through and what we're still going through. So if we bring it down a little bit more locally, right, into your operation and your warehouse and so forth, let's think about how you're handling this today and where you might like to go and what you've learned from it. Certainly, businesses are using a combination of applications these days. Again, the core ERP, the depth of functionality that exists within Sage 100 is very strong, right? It's been a product forever. So it's very mature, lots of features and functions. And again, you've got a partner in DSD that offers all kinds of enhancements, plus all their just internal knowledge and understanding of how to leverage the power of the ERP to the maximum. So you've got a really great foundation and base there. You'll see some other third-party add-ons, maybe some specific applications like warehouse management tools, right, with barcoding and so forth, shipping automation, other sorts of add-ons. And then we often see Excel spreadsheets, of course, having a role in the organization as well. How can I extract some data from the ERP, from Sage, and do some other manipulation with the data? And there certainly are some appropriate uses for that kind of tool. And we'll talk a little bit more about a couple of those things, but I want to make sure, again, another point of context here, just make sure we're aware that, what I'm talking about, there's a really difference between inventory control and inventory replenishment, which I view as two components of the broader title or topic of inventory management, right? And a lot of times when we say the phrase inventory management, we think about that, and even if you go online and Google it and search for inventory management software, right, it's a pretty broad topic in a way. And so we think of it as having two components, and one is inventory control, which is usually what we think of first when we hear that phrase inventory management, managing the physical product, the transactions, all the ins and outs, right? So I'm receiving product, I'm pick, pack, and shipping product, I'm doing physical counts, hopefully cycle counts of your more important items on a more regular basis so that you're staying on top of those counts, making sure that you've got product in the bins that you think you do and making those adjustments and so forth. Maybe bin management is part of that environment. And that's often, again, where we see one of the third-party applications like a ScanForce or ScanCo and others that do warehouse management applications, usually leveraging some sort of barcode technology and handheld devices, right, or now cell phones these days that can do that for us. So I'm very quickly and accurately capturing data as it's happening on the shop floor or in the warehouse and so forth. So I've got really good understanding of what I have, and that's important, critical. But it doesn't answer another key question, which is it the right stuff, right? Do I have the right level of product at the right place at the right time? So what I call the flip side of the inventory management coin, the flip side of inventory control is this concept of replenishment, or you may hear phrases like demand planning or optimization. It's another term you'll hear, inventory optimization. And it's really talking about this aspect of inventory management, which has to do with making sure I've got the right levels. Do I have the right product? Am I ordering smart, right? And that really relies on and requires a good view and understanding and some confidence in my projected demand, my forecast for future demand for my items in a given location. So if I can understand what that demand is going to be, and then I roll into that how my suppliers perform and different functions in the supply chain, now I know when I need to order, what I need to order, and then I get the results that I need where I've really optimized those levels of inventory and maximized my profitability as a result. And part of that is really understanding what are the most important items, right? Which are the most urgent conditions or challenges in my inventory health that I need to address. And so that's really where the NETSTOCK and the Sage Inventory Advisor application comes into play. And so we think about it in terms of really three key problems, right? If we're not solving this, if we're not doing this correctly, if we're not applying best practices to this function in the organization, then we see a couple of symptoms of that. And one is that we're running out of inventory. And that's the worst thing that can happen is I've got a customer comes to my door or my website and says, I want to place a product order and I can't fulfill that order, right? I'm at high risk today of not only losing that particular sales transaction because it's so competitive out there and customer loyalty isn't what it once was. So unless I've got a really unique product that can't be found anywhere else, I'm at risk of losing that sale. And then I'm not only that, but I'm at risk of losing that customer potentially, right? Because if they have a good experience with a competitor, they might open their eyes, say, maybe I'll buy some more stuff from these guys and check them out. And now all of a sudden I've got reduced sales and customer sat. And so it's a terrible condition. And it's the worst thing that can happen with mismanaged inventory levels. But the problem is I can't solve that by simply buying too much because there are real costs and challenges associated with excess stock as well. One of the big ones is that, of course, I'm tying up cash unnecessarily. And we all know, especially in middle market firms that we are typically addressing and that are probably mostly what's on this call, is that cash is king. And I've got lots of projects, lots of ways that I could use that cash and to envision it sitting in a warehouse gathering dust instead of producing activity and profit generating initiatives within my organization would be very frustrating and painful. But that's what we see, right? People solve the stock out problem by buying too much, and we often see 20, 30% or more of inventory that's really in an excess status that didn't need to be there, and it's tying up that cash. And then secondly, there's actually hard carrying costs associated with that excess inventory. First, of course, it's taking up space in the warehouse that I'm paying rent for or a mortgage on, and it's impacting what else I can use that space for. It's opportunity costs. But then I'm also paying property taxes and paying insurance on it. It may be collateral on a loan with the bank, and the bank is going to assess whether that's valid or obsolete inventory. And so the product can get obsolete or other sorts of shrinkage that could occur. So there's real challenges with having the excess stock. So I have to be smart about how I balance those. And then we leave that task to our buyers and planners in the organization, and we don't give them proper tools, right? They kind of have to fend for themselves, running around in the warehouse, very stressful position, getting yelled at by the sales side of the organization for losing sales and running out of product, getting yelled at by the CFO or C-level folks or accounting folks for having too much inventory on the books, right? You get these just kind of arbitrary edicts, hey, I need you to cut 10% or 20% out of your inventory. So, where do I begin with that? How do I even know where's the right place to make those adjustments? So it's a very challenging position and takes an awful lot of time. We find folks using spreadsheets and spending half their time manipulating numbers and correcting errors in formulas and so forth to try to figure this out, and it's not productive. And in one of the things we've learned through this COVID environment is that if I'm spending half my time or more just being an Excel jockey or a numbers jockey trying to figure out what the reality is in my supply chain, then I don't have that time to be working those relationships that we talked about, having those communications with customers and partners and vendors and so forth, looking for alternative suppliers, trying to solve some of those other larger strategic issues, because I just can't get to it because I'm spending time, with the circular errors in my spreadsheet. So the productivity gain by giving those folks the proper tools really has an impact, because now I can make perform those higher level functions that really drive profitability in the organization. So we know that, again, inventory is clearly one of the most critical assets, right? It may be the highest value asset on the balance sheet, depending on what your property values are and what that environment looks like. But even if it's not, it's obviously it's why you're in business, right? Is to make and buy and sell product. And so it's a critical asset, and managing it simply by gut feel or some sort of semi-automated, semi-manual sort of approach really doesn't cut it. And so let's talk about some of those best practices that we alluded to earlier. And again, remember that framework, that best practices really exist in three areas: the people involved, the processes that they employ, and then the technology that's available to them to use to help them drive that best practice. So let's drill in a little bit first on the people and process side. If you may have seen in some of my history or on the NETSTOCK website, I've been fortunate enough to host a number of what we call supply chain chats. And these are conversations with folks that are practitioners and consultants and thought leaders in supply chain, and just kind of getting their sense of what's going on in the marketplace. They've got their finger on the pulse, right? So what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are people doing? What are the challenges and solutions and so forth? And so I had the opportunity to do that last spring, when COVID really hit us hard and shut us down. And I got some great feedback, and I would encourage you to go to the website and hit our blog post page, and you'll see some of those recordings. But but here's a couple of things that came out of some of those conversations and other things that we've observed over the last year or so. And that is that inventory policy, first of all, doesn't exist in some sort of an island or a silo, right? It's not a separate function within the organization. It really needs to be part of and reflective of the corporate policy, right? Well, who are we as a business? What is our go-to-market strategy? Do we say on our website that we have, the best inventory of any competitor, that we deliver same day, or that we can custom order and get stuff quickly? What are our service add-ons that we do to our distribution or manufacturing environment and so forth? So what does that look like? How do we go to market? How do we present ourselves? And now, what does our inventory policy need to be to support that, right? It's not two separate kind of thought processes. And one of the things that we know that in larger organizations and big enterprises, which is where a lot of the founders and consultants within the NETSTOCK environment come from, we know that inventory planners and buyers and supply chain managers have always kind of had a critical seat at the table, if you will, in that definition of corporate policy and inventory policy as a result. That's not always been the case in the middle market. And one of the trends we've seen, and one of the things we've heard from folks as a result of COVID, is that middle market leadership now has really understood the importance and the value, the critical nature of this role, this function in the organization. And that in the middle market, small, medium-sized firms now, those folks that are buyers and planners really now have much more impact, respect from the leadership, and a role to play in identifying what are good policies for us to employ. So I think that's a real trend, and I think it makes a lot of sense, because now we understand how critical this is. Another function and trend that we're seeing more and more of, and consistent feedback on, is just the ability to increase the need to increase communications up and down the supply chain, right? And maybe take it a step further than what we would. We're maybe already in the habit of talking to our suppliers at some regular cadence and so forth. But what about our suppliers further up that chain, right? Maybe if I spent a little bit of our time understanding some of those critical vendors to my supplier, I'd get a better forward-thinking view of what's going on in the marketplace, and so that I can adapt a little bit quicker and maybe be ahead of the curve. Likewise with customers, it's always important to talk to your customers. But what, if I'm not selling to an end user all the time, maybe my customers' customers would also provide some insights that could be valuable to me. So let's identify who some of those key customers of my customers are and have some communication there. So really important to expand, increase the frequency and the depth and the quality of those communications up and down the supply chain. Anybody that already had those avenues in place, we see have definitely been able to adapt to the disruptions more quickly and more effectively. And so I think there's a lesson learned there. Clearly, one of the challenges we've had is, and we talked about this when I referenced the short, medium, long-term kind of conversation, is making bulk adjustments to our forecasts, right? We now really need to pay attention to that and have the ability to more quickly make those adjustments to our forecasted demand. And so that's one of the areas where folks that are using spreadsheets or other kind of custom reports have really had a challenge here because of the volatility, and trying to keep up with those and make those adjustments and do some what if and projections based on potential approaches to and those adjustments has really been a challenge for those folks. And so that's something that we really see as a best practice, being able to make those adjustments very nimbly. Another point here, I already identified a little bit, talked a little bit about getting alternative suppliers, but one of the things that I think is interesting to think about there is not only have those alternative suppliers maybe coming from different regions of the world, maybe coming through different ports, right? So that I've got some balancing that I'm doing there. So not only identifying those alternative suppliers, but probably occasionally buying something from them, even if I didn't need to, even if my primary supplier is still in place and able to meet my needs. I may want to just throw a bone once in a while to that alternative supplier, keep those communications open, stay current with whatever their processes and tools and technologies are, if they're shifting to website only and those kinds of things. If I wait until the last minute when I'm really in a bind and now I got to find an alternate supplier, and I don't have those relationships in place, I don't have understanding of their processes, I don't have the right paperwork filed, et cetera, that's going to hold me up and probably put me to the back of the line of all other folks that might be clamoring for that same supplier to provide some products. So there's a lot of wisdom in maybe not only identifying those alternate suppliers, but actually using them several times during the course of the year as appropriate. Might not be the optimal, profitable, order each time, but there's some risk mitigation that you're doing there that I think is really valuable. So think about that in your situations. And then the last thing I'd mention here from a best practice is just being able to really understand the nature of the items in your inventory, right? How important are they? What are their margins? Which customers are these items critical to? Really allowing you to focus on the most important items, the most profitable and impactful items in your inventory. If you've got 1,000 or 1,500 or more SKUs that you offer in your catalog, right? Obviously, you can't think about every one of those the same way. You can't paint them with the same broad brush every time. So you do that 80-20 analysis maybe, right? Or even a tighter focus than that. And really understand that this is where I want to focus and spend my time because there's good justification for that. So it requires an understanding of those items. So, if we think about your organization and how are you handling those things today, are those best practices from a people and process standpoint in place? And then, of course, what's the technology, right? And of course, I'm a technology guy. We're here talking about software. So let's think about what technology tools are also in use in that environment that help promote those best practices, right? Give my people a tool that works for them so that they can be efficient. Give the team a tool that supports a best practice process in terms of movement of inventory and understanding what we've got there. And so again, we see Excel spreadsheets unfortunately taking a big role here on the replenishment side. And we do some presentations where we talk about a maturity curve of your internal supply chain or your internal processes. And so real early in the maturity, fairly immature processes tend to be very manual and very spreadsheet oriented. And businesses tend to be stuck here sometimes just because they don't realize there's a better way, that there's a better tool. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we're here. Again, leveraging the data that's in the ERP within Sage 100 is critical, and it's all there, right? I mean, we're capturing an incredible amount of data. Every transaction is recorded properly and timely, and so it's all there for us to leverage. The challenge tends to be that it can be somewhat segregated, right? There's all these different tables and files where all these different bits and pieces of data reside, and to try to get a good aggregate view is challenging. So we see some people using business intelligence tools, other data dumps into, whether if it's not Excel, it might be SQL tables and so forth, and doing all kinds of gyrations there to manage that data. and that's because we're all trying to solve the problem, right? The problem is real, it's painful, and we're trying to figure it out since day one, right? Marco Polo probably had this challenge, right? How much do I take back from China to Europe based on my expected demand, right? So it's been an ongoing issue forever. And so then we see some of these third-party products show up as well. Again, things like warehouse management tools, and really this is where Sage Inventory Advisor fits in. Just a couple quick comments on the spreadsheet concept. We've done full webinars just on this topic alone. We've got, I think, an ebook and a series of blog posts that are just on the topic of why spreadsheets don't cut it. And that has certainly been exposed as a result of the incredible disruption of COVID. Spreadsheets were breaking, right? They're just not cutting it. And we heard from many of our customers that purchased our product before COVID hit that were just ecstatic and so thankful that they had the wisdom and foresight to put our tool in place before this hit, because they were able to get that visibility that they needed to really adapt and manage as well as they possibly could. So a number of real key challenges. I won't belabor this, but first of all, getting the data out in an accurate fashion and in a timely fashion and synchronized, so that when I'm grabbing all the data, it's all, it's maybe when everybody's off the system and there's no more transactions going on. Really hard to do these days with remote work going on and with websites constantly updating back-end systems and so forth. So how do I know that I'm getting the data that's synchronized properly and accurate, and that can really be my source of information? Then another issue there is who's in charge of that. Is that one person? There's some real risk there. Is it a team of people? How do I manage who's got control of that process? And what if that individual that has the most control and really understands all the formulas that have been built in the spreadsheets, et cetera, what if that person goes on vacation or gets sick or worse, leaves the firm? Are there other people that can pick that up? That can be a real risk factor. And there are, in fact, some additional inputs that really don't exist in the ERP that need to be added to the mix, right? And then you've got a very dynamic, ever-changing environment, right? You think you got it nailed, and then something changes. You've got new SKUs, new products, new customers, new markets, new vendors, different processes in the warehouse, different people on the team. It's a very dynamic, fast-moving environment. So you never really get to a status that is set. If you do, it's for an hour, and then guess what? Stuff happens. And there's other complications, right? Managing bills of materials. I have demand for a finished good, but how do I blow through demand to all the components and so forth? Adding new warehouses. There's just so many complications. So working with those spreadsheets don't help. They take you a little bit there. They maybe expose some new information, but they're never going to achieve a best practice. And that because you're still having the problems, right? You're still having stock outs of some items. You're still having too much of other items. And again, that your buyers and planners that are responsible for managing that process are just really going 100 miles an hour in a very stressful environment. So you've got a tool there in Sage 100 that can really help you stay on all the data flow, and you need to be able to leverage that data for your replenishment decision making, right? For how do I know what to buy, when to buy it, so that I get maximum profitability out of those items. And so what it really requires is managing all the complexities of the supply chains, the forecast we've talked about, understanding the items, the nature of the items, getting that optimal purchase order, and then seeing that visibility, having stuff at your fingertips, that aggregated view, and then prioritize to help you focus on the right items. And that's what really this is all about, is buying smarter, right? It's all about getting an optimal order recommendation. And so whether you're using the ERP spreadsheets or pen and paper, that's what we're after, right? What's the right result here? And so very much it's about creating smarter orders, buying smarter at the right time. And so you just need to have that visibility, have that dynamic environment that's constantly updating minimums and maximums and lead times and safety stock levels. All that stuff is dynamic, and it tends to not be that way in your ERP, right? Those are static values that get populated and then rarely updated to reflect reality. So that's where we need to leverage the raw data and then do our analysis and analytics with it. And you'll know you found the right tool because it solves the problem, right? All of a sudden, I've got better levels. I'm running out of product less. I've got less inventory that's in excess, and I can see that the trend is going the right way. But even the right tool may not work if A, it's too difficult to implement, or B, it's too expensive, right? It might be the best thing since sliced bread in terms of the technology, but if it's not appropriate for your firm, then it's still not the right tool, right? It's got to be appropriate for your environment. It's got to be affordable and easy to implement. And then there's a real challenge with just change management. Some of you on this call or listening to this may be the ones that have created that master or monster spreadsheet, right? And there's some pride of ownership there, and I get that. You've done yeoman's work trying to figure out how to solve the problem, and you've put blood, sweat, and tears into this maybe for years, and you've got a tool that you trust to some degree. You like it, right? You've used it, it's part of you. But you also know that it's not going to take you fully to that next step that we now realize we need to get to. And if not everybody on the team agrees that we need to get there, then it's also not going to be implemented. So change management is tough with any tool, and in particularly in this function. And so I think this is a great area for DSD and your relationships with DSD to help you with that. They know your business. They know you from top down, right? They know the upper management. They know people down in the warehouse and everything in between. And so leverage those relationships and that expertise that you have with your partnership with DSD to help you get that buy-in at the executive level and get that deployment and adoption at the user level to make sure that you now are really leveraging that tool that you made the investment in, that's going to make a huge difference in your organization. So I think that gives you a sense of kind of what we've been through, where the challenges are, and that even though COVID has been an extreme example, we know that disruption is just a part of the nature of supply chain. And so it always will behoove us to be thinking about what is the best practice, what are the best tools, what's the best way for us to manage this very challenging and critically important environment within the organization. And so then in the next couple of minutes, let me just switch gears a little bit to kind of the NETSTOCK and the Sage Inventory Advisor approach to how we solve this, right? How do we address some of these challenges? And then we should have some time at the end to answer any questions with you as well. I'm not going to do a full demo of the product. We'd be happy to do that anytime, but just give you a sense of some of the things that we approach, how we approach this, and some screenshots just to give you a sense of the interface. So what we did at NETSTOCK some 10, 11 years ago now, took decades of experience that our founders had in very large organizations with very complex supply chains, and took all that domain knowledge and all that understanding of best practices and applied it to building a new application for a new market, for the small, medium-sized business that we recognize now had just as much complexity in many cases as the big guys, right? Buying product from overseas, maybe doing some sub-assemblies and kitting, probably using multiple locations, maybe 3PLs, third-party logistics environments to get my distribution network out wider and closer to my customer, selling omni-channel online and through my own website and other sites like Amazon and eBay and so forth. So all this complexity, all this data flying around, all this new activity, and improper tools, spreadsheets is really what we were after. So NETSTOCK saw that opportunity, had all that domain knowledge, and said, okay, here's what we got to do. We're going to glean all that that we have at our disposal and build a new application for the cloud in the cloud, right? So we knew that the internet was the way to go 10, 11 years ago. And so now it's available on demand on any browser, right? So give me access to this information at my fingertips anytime on any device. Secondly, make sure that it integrates with various key ERPs and accounting software products. So we very early in our career, in fact, right within the first year of the creation of this application, forged a relationship with Sage and quickly became Sage Inventory Advisor, OEM'd by them, branded by them on their price list and so forth, sold through their channel partners. And so we've been a really strong partner with Sage for coming up on 9 years, I guess is the number. And in fact, last year we were named ISV of the year, right? Independent software vendor or third-party partner of the year for Sage, which is no small feat, because they've got a lot of folks like us that leverage their technology. So we're very proud of that. And that comes after lots of years of working with them. We've got hundreds and hundreds of joint customers. So we've done that integration, and we know, Acumatica here we noted because that's also a tool, of course, that DSD promotes and works with. And so if any of you are thinking about, next steps, if you wanted to go from Sage to Acumatica, we work in both those environments. So it's a product that's dashboard driven, graphical, colorful, really smart user interface, lots of visual cues, and it supports that goal of management by exception. If I've got 1,500 or more SKUs or whatever the number is, 10,000, we've got customers that have 1 million SKUs, right? There's no way I can, obviously, how big your team is, you can't manage and look at all those different items. I've got to have a tool that helps me bubble up to my attention which ones are most in trouble and most important to me to solve first, and help me prioritize those. So that's the model we follow. And then again, along the lines of what we talked about with the right tool, very rapidly deployed, very affordable. The ROI is exceptional, right? Almost immediate payback within a month or two on the investment in the application. So give you a quick glimpse of some screens here, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Kimberly, to see if we've got any questions. But just gives you a feel here for the dashboard that I just referenced. These are 6 of the 9 widgets that are on the opening screen. And it's important to note we've got now over 1,600, I think about 1,650 customers around the globe, approaching 900 of those, so well more than half in North America alone. And every one of those customers every single day, which represents some 16,000 individual users across those companies, get this exact same interface every single day, right? We do not modify this. It's tried and true and tested and consistent. Everybody's on the same version every day because of our cloud approach, which is great. And it makes deployment and support so much easier and more effective, right? So this is the interface, but what we do is have the ability to configure what data gets represented on this interface, right? Am I a certain buyer of certain products that I just want to look at my products? Or do I just want to look at a certain supplier or vendor? Do I want to look at a certain location and warehouse or some combination of warehouse locations? So we can configure what data gets represented here to make you effective in your job, but the interface is consistent. And you'll see, again, colorful bar charts across the top that are showing me trends. I've got macro views of numbers, in every one of those statuses. And then I've got what we call our top 5 list that identifies the top 5 SKUs in this location under that particular KPI that is the most egregious or the biggest offender or contributor to that particular problem that we're trying to solve, right? So, and then I've got more color coding there that helps me identify the nature of those items, which is again very helpful. Here's a quick view of our ordering screen. We create this order schedule, we call it, kind of a pro forma purchase order, where NETSTOCK and Sage Inventory Advisor goes out to the database and says, show me everything that I need to order today, and let me break that into an individual supplier and then look at every one of those line items, see the recommendation that Inventory Advisor is making, understand why that's the recommendation because I've got all the data supporting it, again, right there at my fingertips, colorful, color-coded, drill down, drill around capability to double check things. So now I get a sense of why that's the recommendation and do I accept that or not? Do I know something the system didn't? I can make adjustments and update, or either increase or decrease or delete an item, add an item, fill a container, right? We've got all kinds of tools to help you be smart about how you do that. And then you end up creating that optimal purchase order that is, again, the nirvana, right? That's the goal. And when you get it right here, you simply click a button and it goes and produces that purchase order back on the ERP side in the Sage 100 environment. So very useful. This is the view of that. We call it a matrix, right? Our understanding of the nature, the classification of the items in our inventory, and that can be by product line, by supplier, all kinds of ways that we can slice and dice this. But so the items in the upper right, color-coded green, these are high value. So I do my ABC analysis and ranking my items by value. But then I also look at the speed of movement of those items, high, medium, low. And so over in the upper right, high value, fast moving items, color coded green. These are the ones where we probably want to have higher fill rate targets, maybe different replenishment policies, pay closer attention to them so I can build policies and procedures and metrics and goals around these items that are different from, say, the items in the lower left that are color coded red here, low value, slow moving items, right? Maybe these are nuts and bolts for a production process. Maybe I question why I even bother stocking some of these, so I can rationalize my inventory a little bit just because of the visibility that I get and all the analytics that I get here to help me understand the nature of those items. And then a little bit of a quick glimpse of an individual item forecasting environment. We're looking at 23 months worth of history by units, and then I can project based on that historical demand profile. We apply one of our 30 or 32 algorithms to that, find the best match, predict the future demand for the next 12 months, but then have the ability for buyers and planners to override and amend that forecast if there's some unique information, something new that we just learned that maybe the historical data wouldn't present to us. So we have the ability to make those adjustments. So just a quick glimpse there of some of the screenshots and some of the interface within the application. Really easy to use and deploy. We get people up and running very quickly, and just almost immediately has a tremendous impact on the profitability of the organization just by getting a better handle on this aspect of inventory management. So I think with that, Kimberly, I'll turn it back over to you, see if there are some questions from the audience or any other comments. But again, there's my contact information there, a couple of websites that you can go take a look at for further information, some good video content and other useful information. I mentioned our blog post. I think would be great for you to sign up for that and get some regular, really good thinking on how to manage this environment. And always happy to schedule a personal conversation or demo the product with you at any time. So Kimberly?
Great, thank you, Russ. So one question came through about the time it takes to implement. You did kind of touch saying it was quick, but maybe you could elaborate on that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think, first of all, it's important to know because of all the implementations that we've done and that we're doing, I think we're probably doing something like 15 or 20 a month is our current pace. So we have a very mature methodology, a real solid process that we follow and walk our customers through when they sign a contract with us. So, and so that really helps us stay on track. We really know how to set the expectations and how to execute. And so it's very typical for a distribution business that's maybe doing some kitting, some light assembly work perhaps, to be up and running in 4 to 6 weeks, not at all uncommon. I've seen it as fast as 2 weeks. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that because obviously you've got other work to do during your day. It probably is about a 30 or 40 hour commitment on the part of the end user to work through some of the training materials, both written and video, and then to schedule our coaching sessions from our team and to configure the data and test it and so forth. So probably 30, 40 hours spread across 4 to 6 weeks is I guess, the most typical environment. If you're doing manufacturing with detailed multi-layer bills of materials, maybe we add an extra week or two to that just because it takes some extra configuration and training there. So hopefully that gives you a sense, but very rapid time to value. I mean, you're producing optimal purchase orders within weeks, which is amazing.
Yeah, perfect. So another one came through about the pricing for Sage Inventory Advisor. I think the question more relates to kind of what is that basic version that maybe some of our clients are seeing versus, a sort of grade.
Yeah, great question, and it has been a source of some confusion in the Sage community over the last year or so. For several years, as people signed on for a Gold or Platinum Business Care plan from Sage, it came bundled with a free basic version, as it was known, of Sage Inventory Advisor. It still required people to activate that, right, to reach out to us and say, yes, I'd like to get that going, because they're still required our coaching and configuration and so forth to make that happen, but it was free. No cost for folks to do that. And so we've got hundreds of people that took advantage of that opportunity. As of last July 1, that was no longer an opportunity that was available. The basics product is still available if it's the appropriate solution for your organization, which we can help assess, but it's no longer free. It's no longer bundled with those business care plans. It's at a lower cost than the full-blown version, right? But it's no longer free. So basics is still there if it's the right fit for you. It was really designed for kind of the lower 10 or 20% of the market, right? Single warehouse, simple distribution environment, no manufacturing support, no bill of materials support. So really geared for the smaller end of the scale. If you've got any complexity at all, the basics version is probably not the right solution for you anyway. You really need some of the features of the full version. And so all those versions, the full or basic, are comprised of two different components. There's a one-time, what we call an activation fee that covers that. It's a flat fee to cover that onboarding methodology that I just described over that timeline. And then it's a monthly or an annual subscription to access the service. So there's two components to the price, and in the full version, that price fluctuates and scales based on the size of the inventory value. So if you've got $1 million worth of inventory on the books, it would be one price for each of those pieces or components of the price. If it's 5 million, it would be slightly higher, 10 million, a little bit higher, and so forth. So we'd be happy to chat with you individually, understand where you're at, what your organization's needs are, and put a price quote together for you. But very cost effective. Return on investment is triple digits, like paybacks within months, couple months.
Very good. Thank you for that. So that actually is all of the questions that we have received.
Okay.
Attendees, if you have additional questions, please feel free to respond to any of the emails that have been sent to you from myself, or as you see on the screen here, Russ's email and phone are listed. But happy to give all attendees back about 5 minutes of the hour if we're at a good stopping point.
I certainly appreciate the opportunity, and I encourage you all to leverage your relationships with your account manager at DSD. We've got lots of mutual customers within the DSD network that they can reference and talk to you about, and share their experiences and so forth. So happy to reach out with you personally, but leverage your relationship with DSD as well. And thanks again for the opportunity. Hope that was helpful.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Russ and the NETSTOCK team, and to all attendees, thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.